So we're going to look at audio routing basics today. When you first get familiar with your DAW and start mixing, it's only natural that you're going to want to be a bit more ambitious. You just need to double check yourself, just make sure you understand a few of the basic things. Making sure you know how things are routed, making sure you know kind of the signal path is going to come in really useful. One of the things that I find time and time again, if you just bring up the mixer here, is that the way in which you put the inserts into the insert chain here is not always consistent with what you're hoping the output would be. For instance, if you put the noise gate below the compressor, you're going to actually effectively compress the sound before it gets to the noise gate, in which case it's going to make your job slightly more hard. A little diagram here that I put together where you can basically see here's the uncompressed signal. And here's two really evident points. If I was compressing this vocal and I wanted to get rid of any noise that was in this spill here and this spill here, I'm going to put the noise gate on, I'm going to get the threshold right, and I'm going to set that up so it just reduces it completely. However, if I put the compression on first, I mean this is quite a heavy compressor just to kind of illustrate the point, you're going to see that I've got first heighten the threshold in order to kind of capture all of that before it's going to do its job properly, and I'm going to miss some bits, and the same bit there. So getting the right signal chain together is so important. A fairly obvious thing, input to output. So as your signal, as your voice or as your sound comes in from the microphone or in from the DI box, it's obviously creating this input signal. We're going to apply our gain, we're going to get our levels right at this point. Then at this point here, we're going to set our processing. So we're going to set our compression, our gating, our EQs, etc. Then it's going to go to our output. Once it gets to the output, you can obviously, on the output channel, you can still set more parameters, more processing, and then it's going to finally get to our speakers. Okay, so that's a simple chain here. Okay, and just to illustrate that again, as you can see, in my illustration, it doesn't really work completely like this, but in my illustration here, you see the input's coming down, it's coming through the channel, and then it's leaving after the volume and the panning's been applied, and it's going off to our output signal, then it's going down the chain again until it gets to the bottom, and then it's off again, okay? That's a fairly simple analogy, and you can see where it's going to by this button here. This is our output signal. This is where it tells us actually where do you want the signal to go to next after it's finished all the processing and all the bits and pieces there. And as you can see, it's going to our stereo output channel, which is this one here, stereo output. But what happens when you want to get a little bit more complex? What happens when you want to do group busing? And that's fairly simple. Again, as long as you understand the chain that it's going through, it's fairly simple to set up a group bus and then send it to the output, as shown in this diagram here. So all of our signals applied, it goes down to this panel here. So rather than the stereo out, it's now going bus 1. After it's sent to bus 1, it's then coming down here again. So as you can see, I'm compressing all of my drum channels together. Really good technique if you want to get them to feel like they all belong together a bit more. I don't recommend heavy compression, but certainly a little bit more. And then we're going to send it to the output, okay? So that's fairly simple again. So that now we're understanding how the chain works. It's becoming a bit more obvious. The final example of the day is what if we want to use send effects? So send effects work slightly different. As you can see from here, we've got two places where we're going to send our signal out from. Okay, so it's sent to the output, but it's also going to be sent to the bus 2. Now the bus 2 has this little dial next to it, this little green dial. Depending on how much that's turned up is depending on how much signal gets sent to the bus 2 or the aux 2 before being sent to the output channel. If I turn it all the way up, no signal would come down here. It would all go from here straight to bus 2, where I've got my reverb applied to it on this insert, and then it's going to be sent out here. I've got it set to roughly, it's about 40%, but say 50%. So 50% of my channel is going to go to bus 2, where that clean signal is going to have reverb applied to it, by this platinum reverb here. And then the other part of my signal, the other 50% of my signal, is going straight to my output. Once it gets to this point here, both 50% of my signal are going to be recombined before being sent to my speakers. So hopefully that gives you a really nice insight into what's happening with the signal buses. Your chance to experiment now. One thing I like to do is set up a multi-effects unit. So I've got my little vocal here and I'm sending it to this bus 2, okay? So I'm sending it to this bus 2, or this aux channel, and I've just set up a reverb, but you could set up whatever you want. You could set up reverb, delay, tremolo, some kind of distortion, etc., etc. If you even want, you can then send this signal to another send, so even further processing the signal. I would say to you at this point, experiment with some of this stuff, see what you understand, what you can do, what your limits are.